Hello, everyone. This is Craig Brosford with RedChip Companies. Thank you for joining today's event with Connect Biopharma Holdings, which trades on the Nasdaq under the ticker CNTB. With us today, we have Barry Quart, who is the CEO. We will begin with a brief presentation in a moment, and then we will answer your questions. Users may submit a question at any time. Click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window. Before we begin, please allow me to read the Safe Harbor Statement. This call may contain forward-looking statements within the meaning of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. All statements pertaining to future financial and/or operating results, along with other statements about the future expectations, beliefs, goals, plans, or prospects expressed by management, constitute forward-looking statements. Any statements that are not historical fact should also be considered forward-looking statements. Of course, forward-looking statements involve risks and uncertainties. I now turn this webinar over to Barry. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I appreciate your taking the time for me to introduce the Connect story, as I like to call it, the Connect 2.0 story. We have, over the course of the last year, put in place an entirely new management team, a new focus for both the company as well as for our primary asset, Rademikibart, which is a next generation Dupixent IL-4 receptor alpha monoclonal antibody. But let me kind of take a step back and remind everyone. So Connect was a Chinese-based biotech focused on monoclonal antibody technology. Approximately a year ago, myself and David Sakaris came in to the company to do two things: to change the approach in terms of development and make the company more U.S. centric. And we've been able to accomplish both of these. We've now started an entirely new program with Rademikibart that I'm very excited to talk about. We've changed the headquarters of the company to San Diego. We filed our first 10K and 10Q, and we'll continue to be a U.S. filer moving forward. And we have met with the FDA and gotten agreement on a new development pathway. So let me give you the 10,000-foot view of Rademikibart. These are the ongoing studies as well as the completed studies. And you can see that there's been a significant amount of work done with Rademikibart in two indications, one atopic dermatitis and the other asthma. Not surprising given the fact that it's an IL-4 monoclonal antibody. Dupixent has already demonstrated significant efficacy for both of these indications. In terms of the completed studies, you'll see there's several atopic dermatitis studies. There's one additional ongoing study, which an interim analysis was recently filed as part of an NDA filing in China by our partners, Simcere Pharmaceuticals. And so we're anticipating approval of Rademikibart in China sometime mid next year for atopic dermatitis. They are also running a phase 3 study in chronic asthma and would be filing for asthma as soon as that study is completed. We have completed a phase 2 study in asthma demonstrating clear efficacy in terms of improvement in lung function and reduction in exacerbations. But we also noted something quite unique in terms of the speed of onset of the product was so great that it opened up the opportunity to look at the drug in acute episodes of COPD and asthma. And that's our current target. So just to kind of give an overview as a reminder for people, asthma and COPD afflict very large numbers of patients in the United States. Very many patients fail current therapy. And probably the most important item on this slide is that every year, approximately 1 million patients with asthma go to emergency departments because of acute exacerbations. About 1.3 million patients with COPD go to emergency departments because of acute exacerbations. Now, this is just a part of those patients that are having exacerbations, because large numbers of patients, this is looking at asthma where we have the best data, go to urgent care, might be more convenient than emergency department, or they go to their doctor's office. And obviously, there's a portion that get hospitalized as well. So there's a very large number of patients having significant symptoms associated with an acute exacerbation. And these ultimately would be our target population of patients. Similar numbers in Europe. So this is clearly a global problem. And so as you can see here, large numbers of patients going to emergency departments in Europe for asthma and COPD. And so why are we focused on that? Well, I'll show you in 1 minute. Just again, a reminder, the IL-4 monoclonal antibodies are able to block two important cytokines, both IL-4 and IL-13 signaling, both of them closely associated with diseases like T2 mediated asthma, COPD, as well as atopic dermatitis. So as I mentioned, we have conducted a phase 2 study in chronic asthma patients. This was a large study looking at two different dose levels of Rademikibart versus placebo, with a 24-month overall assessment in terms of efficacy and safety. And this is looking at the improvement in airway function in those patients. So we measure airway function in this study using a spirometer, a little handheld device, and we're looking at what's called FEV1, and that's the fraction of that forced air out of the lungs in 1 second. Forced expiratory volume in 1 second, FEV1. And this shows at the first week after dosing was the first time patients came back to the clinic. And you can see a highly statistically significant improvement in airway function at that 1 week time point. And that was pretty much maintained through the 24 weeks. The patients that were randomized to the higher dose had over time even a greater improvement. All the patients initially got the same 600 milligram loading dose. So the first 2 weeks, all patients essentially got the same dose. We were fortunate that patients had a home spirometer that we could use to get a little more granular than this first week assessment. And that home spirometer showed that the very first morning after a dose, so a patient came in, let's say they might have come into the clinic in the afternoon, they got their first dose of drug. Next morning, over 70% of this 1 week benefit was already observed in that first morning spirometry test. So very rapid onset of effect, much faster than what's been described for other biologics. That opened up the opportunity to now look at the use of Rademikibart for the actual treatment of an acute exacerbation. So we met with the FDA and got to go ahead to start 2 parallel studies, one in asthma patients, one in COPD patients. And then the unique aspect here is these are patients actually having an exacerbation at the time. The chronic study that we previously conducted and all of the chronic studies that have been done for the development of Dupixent and all the other biologics that have been approved for asthma and COPD for that matter, all of those studies use stable patients and they are randomized to drug or placebo. And then the goal is to hopefully avoid exacerbations. But patients who just had an exacerbation are excluded from all those other studies. So this is a population that really has never been systematically studied for the development of biologics. And this is an opportunity to really change the treatment paradigm for both asthma and COPD patients having an exacerbation. Today, standard of care, which all of these patients will receive, is prednisone, so a steroid, and bronchodilator. Same thing they would have received 30 years ago. So really no progress has been made in a very long time in terms of treatment of acute exacerbations. So in this study where everybody's getting standard of care, SOC, they get randomized in a blinded fashion to a Rademikibart loading dose or placebo. That's going to cover the patient for a month. And so we'll be looking to see over the course of that month if we improve the acute exacerbation. In other words, do symptoms go away faster? Does airway improve faster? And do they also have a second episode over the course of a month? Turns out that about half the patients will be expected to what we call have a treatment failure. So this is published data from earlier this year from a very important study actually looking at these kinds of patients having an acute exacerbation. In this study, they were randomized to benralizumab, an IL-5 monoclonal antibody, versus placebo, looking at treatment failure. And you can see in the first 3 weeks, really no difference between benralizumab and placebo. It took around 3 weeks for it to start to work, and then you start to see a separation in the curves. Because our drug starts working within hours, we would obviously expect to see a separation happening very much sooner and hopefully an even larger separation than what's seen here. But what's important about this data, it also highlights that about 50% of patients, 45% specifically, in the control group had treatment failure in 4 weeks. That means they either continued to get worse after their initial ER visit and had to come back to the ER or the doctor for more medication, or they got better initially and then they started getting worse again and having a second episode. So that's a very large group of patients that are really not having a desired outcome from initial treatment. We can definitely do better. And we believe Rademikibart has the opportunity to do much better. This is just a cross-study comparison. Obviously, it doesn't prove superiority because these trials were separated and not done in exactly the same population of patients. But in the far right column, we tried to match apples to apples in terms of the same kinds of patients. And you can see overall, the airway improvement that we see with Rademikibart is certainly amongst the largest that has been seen with other biologics. And we believe that that's going to be something that we continue to see as we do more trials. We've also seen a clear differential in the safety profile of Rademikibart versus Dupixent. Dupixent in asthma patients specifically has kind of a unique side effect of increasing eosinophils. These are the immune cells that produce the inflammation. And while we decrease eosinophils, as you can see, the percent of patients having elevated eosinophils was almost half the placebo number with Rademikibart. Well, where it's almost double or more than double with Dupixent, and large numbers are getting very large increases in eosinophils on Dupixent. And this is not just a lab observation. This is from the FAERS database, an FDA side effect database. And you can see as the drug was launched for asthma, you start to see significant numbers of serious adverse events reported to the FDA with Dupixent due to elevated eosinophils. So this is a clear issue where we do not have that propensity. So when we went out to do market research for Rademikibart, particularly with this potentially differential indication of acute use, we found that it resonated remarkably well with clinicians who, as I mentioned, really have not had anything new in over 30 years. They found it to be a clear differentiator versus other biologics. And they had remarkably high numbers indicated that they would maintain patients chronically on the drug that was used acutely if the patient did well. So it was a gateway to significant chronic use. And one thing I want to point out is that Dupixent, as well as all of the other biologics approved for asthma and COPD, explicitly say in their warning and precaution section of the label, do not use to treat acute symptoms or acute exacerbations of asthma or COPD. So it's not a question of that people, might or might not use it. It's explicitly stated to not be used in that setting. So we would have not only the only product with an indication, but the only one that you could use in that setting. We also have a very high yield manufacturing process that will allow us to price the product in a hospital friendly manner for the hospital and have a different presentation for outpatient use. So the goal is drive as much use in the hospital, which then drives the chronic use in the outpatient setting where it's much more profitable. And by doing that, we have peak forecasts of over 5 billion between asthma and COPD. And I'll point out that these are base case estimates, only looking at the potential for use in the emergency department. Didn't include the use in urgent care or anywhere else. I'll also point out that there is the significant opportunity ex-US as well. And I think I've already covered most of these things in terms of our manufacturing. I'll point out that manufacturing has been transferred to the US. Our US contract manufacturer has successfully manufactured multiple batches. We have the high yield cell line going to be transferred to them later this year and into early next year. We've completed the phase 2 in chronic asthma. We have FDA approval to move into phase 3 for chronic asthma. We've kind of put that on temporary hold until we complete the 2 acute studies that I've already discussed. And we expect to have data from the acute studies in the first half of next year. One of the great benefits of focusing on the acute indication is it's just a 1-month endpoint. Long exclusivity. We anticipate exclusivity well past 2040. And overall, large opportunity, differentiated indications, differentiated safety profile, efficacy profile. I'll also point out that Dupixent is given every 2 weeks. They've looked at it, trying to extend that to 4 weeks in atopic dermatitis, and that failed. We have the data showing that every 4 weeks works perfectly fine with Rademikibart. And so going forward, we would be doing studies every 4 weeks. So we're also differentiated from the point of view of how often patients have to take an injection. And as I mentioned, over the course of the last year, we've accomplished a lot as we've moved the company to be more US centric, initiated the acute studies, and we'll be waiting for the data first half of next year. And what the take home message on the financial side is, at the end of March, we had approximately 84 million. And that gives us a runway into 2027. So data first half of 26, runway into 2027. So with that, I'll conclude my portion of this and turn it over for questions.
Thank you very much, Barry. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box. Q&A button is in the middle, the bottom middle of your Zoom window. We already have some questions, Barry. Where are the current trials being conducted? Any notable sites or people involved?
The actual sites, as they are started, will be listed on clinicaltrials.gov. We have to list individual sites now. In terms of locations, the majority of sites we anticipate will be in the US. We're also opening up sites in Latin America, Australia, so that we are able to enroll patients in the opposite seasons. So we know that, for example, there's a lot of exacerbations in winter. And so by having sites both in the northern and southern hemisphere, we get 2 winters in a year. And we also have sites in Eastern Europe, but we anticipate majority of patients coming from the US.
Thank you very much, Barry. Do you have any estimates on how many patients go to urgent care instead of the ER with asthma attacks?
Yeah, on the slide I showed, and this was very recent data published just about a month ago, looking at where patients go, and that was very difficult data to obtain. So it was great to see that publication. If there's 1 million patients going to emergency department, which is a pretty rock solid number, approximately 1.3 million patients are going to urgent care, and a fairly similar number are going to their doctor's office to get treatment.
Thank you, Barry. Assuming the top line data from P2, phase 2 Seabreeze in the first half of 2026, what would be the realistic timeline or timelines for the completion of a phase 3 study for acute exacerbations and regulatory submission, and two, same for maintenance, considering timeline of safety data? Sorry, that 2/ was a little unclear for me.
Yeah, no problem. So, yeah, if we look at the timeline, getting data first half, we would then meet with the FDA as soon as we had the top line results to map out the phase 3 plan. Probably be able to start phase 3 in late 26. As we don't anticipate that the phase 3 studies would be very different than phase 2. The phase 2 studies, which are 160 patients per study, are powered about 85% for success. Obviously, once we have the final data from those, we'll be able to fine tune it and make sure we're 90% powered. But I anticipate the total size to be not too dissimilar. So it's obviously possible to do those studies within a year. So that would mean end of 27 for the acute studies. The chronic studies are obviously much longer to enroll and much longer to monitor the patients. So they're much more of a 2.5 year timeline. So acute would definitely come first. And so there'd be an opportunity to get approval for the acute in, say, 28. And from a safety point of view, we already have over 1,000 patients exposed to Rademikibart with a very clean safety profile in the chronic 24-week asthma study. The safety profile was really not dissimilar from placebo. So based on the very significant safety database we already have, we think we'd be able to move forward with an application around that time for the acute indication.
Assuming the Sea Breeze trials go well, will you seek a partner for phase 3? Would you consider selling the company if a compelling offer came in?
We absolutely will be looking for a commercial partner. As I mentioned, we obviously have a commercial partner in China. We would love to have one that would take rest of world outside of China. In my experience, at that juncture, having the phase 2 data in the acute and the chronic, and an FDA approved plan to what it would take in terms of phase 3 program and kind of clear pathway forward in terms of timing and cost. It's kind of the ideal time to hopefully turn a commercial partner into an acquirer. I've been able to accomplish that in the prior companies, and certainly that would be the optimal outcome here, but obviously would have to be at the appropriate price. Otherwise, one would look at the commercial partner, and as a backstop, because I think it's always important, to plan for success, hope for success, but also have a backup strategy. The great thing about this acute indication is if we can't find a partner or acquirer, it would be very economical to move forward with just the acute indication alone, and be able to prosecute that with a really modest amount of additional dollars. So it's a great backup opportunity.
What type of milestones can we expect with your Chinese partner over the next 12 months?
Well, we haven't given explicit guidance in terms of milestones. We are owed both regulatory and commercial milestones of about $110 million going forward. But the milestones that would be coming to us in the next year, year and a half, depending on when they filed for asthma, would be somewhere close to what we previously have received. And if you look at our filings last year, we received approximately 25 million in upfront and milestone payments from Simcere. And so that's a reasonable target to be thinking about.
Are there any plans to pursue atopic dermatitis in the United States?
Not for us. Atopic dermatitis is a very crowded space. We believe the data with Rademikibart are excellent, and looking forward to seeing the data from the study that our partners completing in China. It'll be a great opportunity to compare that data to other phase 3 data in Chinese patients. I think we'll find that we have much better efficacy than Dupixent. Again, cross-study comparisons. And so that's a great data set to have when talking to a potential partner or slash acquirer. because for someone with deeper pockets and moving forward with asthma, COPD indications, bolting on another indication for AD at a pretty reasonable price would be very attractive to many companies that have lots of sales force and maybe a derm, sales force specifically. But for us, too expensive, too crowded. We're not going to invest any more money in that.
It looks as if you have enough cash for 2 years. Why did you file a shelf?
Great question. I appreciate the opportunity to rest assured. It's good housekeeping. Our shelf was expiring, and I've been doing this a while. And the best time to do a shelf is when you don't need it, and that's exactly what we did. Is just for housekeeping purposes, replacing an expiring shelf with a new one. Don't anticipate using it anytime soon.
Thanks, Barry. Do you know how much your cost of goods sold will be? Is this a relatively easy drug to manufacture?
Well, it's a biologic, so I would never say easy, but we have a very high yield process, which means these drugs are manufactured by taking living cells, basically teaching them to manufacture the drug for us, growing those cells in giant vats, and then collecting the drug that's manufactured by those cells. A kind of a very crude way to describe it, but that's essentially how it's made. And so, it's very complex, but if you can teach the cells to make a lot of it, then it becomes economical. And our process, we believe, makes it very economical to be able to price the product in the hospital setting at a price where we will not get the pushback from hospitals in terms of utilization, and then be able to charge essentially the Dupixent price in the outpatient setting. Dupixent is $3,800 a month, whack. We certainly could charge a discount to that, and still make a very significant profit, and charge, a few $100s in the hospital setting and still make a significant profit.
Once again, if you have a question for Barry Quart, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window and then type your question into the text box. We'll give everyone a moment or two to think of any final questions for Barry Quart. Barry, this may be a good question to wind up with. This person asks, why did you join the company? You have had a lot of success, and this is a relatively small company compared to your prior companies.
That is an excellent question. So I was quasi-retired, and just planned on sitting on some boards, when the board of directors of Connect came to me and asked me to take a look at the company. I spent almost 3 months doing intensive diligence because I just started to get more and more interested in the product. And it came to the clear conclusion that this was an approvable drug. I've developed 9 drugs through development, through regulatory to US approval. A few of them invented some of those drugs. And so I have a pretty good sense of when a drug is going to pass muster. And this clearly was an approvable drug from my point of view. And so the more I got into it, the more invested I was, and that this was truly a diamond in the rough from the point of view of creating value for shareholders. But also, what gets me up in the morning is I believe we can completely change the paradigm of how patients are treated around the world, and being able to dramatically improve patient care in people who really have not seen an improvement in essentially my lifetime. This is what gets me up in the morning to drive this forward.
And that's a wonderful way to end up. Thank you very much, Barry. For more
Thank
information, let me just tell everybody how to get more information on Connect Biopharma. You can reach us at 1-800-RED-CHIP or email us at cntb@redchip.com. Please also visit the information page created by RedChip for Connect. It's cntbinfo.com. There you can view and download the investor presentation and fact sheet and sign up for news alerts on Connect Biopharma. Watch Small Stocks, Big Money, RedChip's program featuring exciting small cap companies every Saturday night at 7 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg USA. And finally, join RedChip's next webinar with Atossa Therapeutics tomorrow at 4:15 p.m. Eastern. Register for all RedChip webinars at redchip.com/events. Thanks again, participants, and thank you, Barry.
you, and thanks to everybody who tuned in.